really good tennis players, like really good chess players, are always thinking 4 or 5 moves ahead. But it's also very combative. You and I are playing. If I win, you lose. I'm trying to beat you. Very individual. I don't feel like this is making any sense at all.
It does.
Okay.
Even when our own thoughts, feelings and motivations are so readily accessible to us, it is often quite futile to work so tirelessly as we often do, trying to convey these things to those around us. It is almost trite and insipid how often we hear the sentiment, "You can never truly tell what is going on in someone's head," and it's true, is it not? Yet we work so tirelessly, trying to convey verbally what we are thinking to others and to ourselves. But sometimes the English language, or whichever language you speak, is not enough to express the intricacies and vastness of what goes on deep down. There exists an epistemological gap between all of us, things we can never truly understand about ourselves and each other. In Good Old Neon, David Foster Wallace tries to bridge this gap. On a random Tuesday 2 months ago, I decided on a whim to pick up David Foster Wallace's Oblivion, a collection of his short stories published 4 years before he took his own life. At this point, I was struggling to get through Infinite Jest, but I'd read and fallen in love with his other works. My very first video on this channel was putting you on to David Foster Wallace. My love for his work cannot be understated. I am a big fan. That is mainly because of this 40-page long short story, Good Old Neon. Now, of course, this is one of those stories that is practically unspoilable, but feel free to go read it fast if you haven't already before coming back to this video. This story, narrated from beyond the grave, follows Neil, a 29-year-old advertising executive. Now, by all accounts, Neil is successful. He has a good job, has slept with multiple women to a point of contracting venereal diseases, if you consider that sort of thing admirable. He performed remarkably well in school and in sports, and got to touch Angela Mead's bosom in middle school. Despite all his accomplishments, he feels like a fraud. The first line of the story goes, "My whole life I have been a fraud. I'm not exaggerating. Pretty much all I have done is to create an impression of me in other people." Neil, who does everything in his life in a calculated self-referential way, is motivated by the need to be applauded, approved of, and a fear that he will not be able to replicate the same success he has now in future. As bleak and all too relatable that this is, what makes these more heart-wrenching is that he actively throughout the story knows that he is a fraud and tries everything he can to a fault to try to feel less like a fraud. But whatever he does offers but a temporary relief, because the longer he does something, the more he becomes performative at it too. Because by his own characterization, he only experiences things on the basis of how they affect people's perception of him. He tries church, for example, and does enjoy its earnestness and community for a bit. But as time goes by, he starts making a show of his praise and worship, to be the loudest, the holiest of the congregation, to prove his devotion to the church. He tries yoga and is able to meditate longer than everyone in class, enough that he earns a certificate. His calculated nature undermines any of his sincere actions and need for change. He figures out what he wants someone to do and takes actions so that his actions induce a certain reaction from someone, the reaction he wants. Everything he does, Neil does it for the wrong reasons, and so he is riddled with guilt for it. He realizes at 19 the fraudulence paradox, which he describes as the more time and effort you put into trying to appear impressive or attractive to others, the less impressive or attractive you felt inside. You are a fraud, and the more of a fraud you felt like, the harder you try to convey an impressive or likable image of yourself, so that people wouldn't find out what a hollow, fraudulent person you really were. Quite a catch-22, is it not? His fraudulence is a mask to make him likable and accepted, but it leaves him frightened, lonely, and alienated, which forces him to be more of a fraud. Neil, seeks to be seen for the fraud that he is, to be found out, that someone can see right through him. So he goes to psychoanalysis by Dr. Gustafsson, whom he hopes will be able to do it. He spends the time there, however, anxious psychoanalyzing the doctor as a repressed homosexual and lying to him. And when he finally realizes that the doctor has fallen for his facade, he calls it quits and takes his own life. The story revolves around Neil's inability to be perceived by those around him the same way he perceives himself. The infinite expanse of the human soul, the pain and human experience that he can never really share with those around him. Neil does acknowledge throughout the narration that we are all frauds. He says, of course you're a fraud. Of course what people see is never you. And of course you know this. And of course you try to manage what part they see. Now the story's overarching message is that we can never truly communicate what we are going through in a linear way or with our words nonetheless. I know you know as well as I do now how fast thoughts and associations can fly through your head. You can be in the middle of a creative meeting at your job or something, and enough material can rush through your head just in the little silences when people are looking over their notes and waiting for the next presentation that it would take exponentially longer than the whole meeting just to try to put a few seconds of silence into words. It is clumsy and laborious trying to convey the smallest things, even to ourselves. 1 second worth of thought can consume a whole book to explain and make sense of. From going on tangents, relating one occurrence to another. You could try it now. Think of something, anything. Watch yourself go down a spiral of relations. This story is the closest to having the mental workings of a person explained. But the narrator, whom the story is really about, who's David Foster Wallace, acknowledges the banalities of it all. He notices that trying to figure out the inner machinations of our minds and the minds of other people is impossible. But the existence of good old neon proves otherwise. That David would, in such vivid detail, explain the struggle, selfishness, need to perform and constant need for change and growth does offer us hope that our epistemological gap of knowledge can be filled in some way. So do give this book a go, and I hope that it will, as it did to me, speak to you.